All right, let's dive into this one. We've got an interesting deep dive today. It's all about, you guessed it, British accents.
Oh, yeah, popular one.
Yeah, a lot of people want to learn how to speak with a British accent, and even the host of the podcast that we're diving into today, he says he gets asked about it all the time.
It's funny, right? You're trying to, like, adopt a British accent, but this guy,
Yeah.
he actually modified his accent to be more clear. So
Wow.
it makes you wonder about accents and their importance. He even says that
Yeah,
they can definitely influence how people see you.
it's true. Okay, so let's get to some of the tips that he gives in this podcast. He really stresses that you need to practice pronunciation early on.
Mm.
And I like how he says, avoid cementing mistakes.
Yeah.
And he even tells this story about how he himself didn't realize that he was saying up instead of up
Oh, wow.
until he recorded himself and listened back.
Oh, that's interesting because it shows that those subtle differences, it's like they kind of evolve over time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you don't really notice them unless you're really paying attention. And he mentions this idea of shadowing. Have you heard of shadowing?
Yeah, it's where you listen, you try to mimic.
Exactly. You mimic the speaker, and it helps train your ear to really pick up on those nuances.
Now, he talks about using visual cues as well.
Oh, right.
So like using a mirror or watching videos of native speakers to kind of see how they're moving their mouth and tongue.
Makes sense.
Yeah, it's like learning a dance for your mouth.
Yeah.
And he gives a really specific example with the English L, how important the tongue placement is.
Yeah. Tongue placement is huge for so many sounds, and especially for English. If you want to sound clear, you really got to get that tongue in the right spot, especially for sounds that are very different from your native language.
That's true.
And speaking of tricky sounds, he spends a lot of time on the English R.
Oh, right.
Because, unlike a lot of languages, your tongue isn't touching anything in your mouth
Really?
when you make that R sound, so that can be really hard.
He recommends a website called Forvo.
Oh, yeah, I love Forvo. It's like this amazing pronunciation database.
Yeah, and it's got so many different accents.
Yeah, you can hear like all these variations within British English too, like how someone from London might pronounce a word versus someone from Liverpool.
That's so cool. Now, this is where it gets kind of tricky. He talks about word stress
Okay.
and how you can totally change the meaning of a word depending on where you stress the syllable.
Right,
Like the word present.
right.
Present is a noun, but
Yeah.
present is a verb.
It's true, and word stress is so important, not just for sounding natural, but for avoiding misunderstandings too.
Absolutely.
And he points out some big differences between American and British English with word stress patterns, like words that end in "ile." Americans usually stress the last syllable like mobile, but in British English, it's immobile. The stress is on the first syllable.
He gives a great tip. He says, use a dictionary that has the audio pronunciations and the stress markings.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Simple but effective. And actually, Forvo can be really helpful with that too.
Oh, yeah. You can hear different speakers
Yeah.
and how they place the emphasis.
Mhm.
Like you said, it's a pronunciation safety net. It's like, yeah, let me just double check and make sure.
And it's not just individual sounds. It's for practicing that word stress.
Absolutely.
Like, how do you say this word advertisement? Where's the emphasis?
Right, exactly.
Mm.
So he also talks about word endings, like Asian endings. We'll dive into that later.
Yeah, we'll get into that.
But just to give you a taste, the vowels before that ending can sound different between American and British English.
And what about that T?
Oh, the T, yes. He uses the word butter,
Butter, yeah.
and how in British English it's often pronounced crisply, that T.
Yeah.
But in some American accents, it can almost sound like a D.
And he said in some parts of Britain, the T can even disappear. So it's like brar.
It's amazing how much variation there can be in one language.
It is.
And it really shows how a single sound can kind of be a marker
Yeah.
of where you're from or your identity. We were talking about word endings and Asian endings.
Yeah. It's interesting because, like the word organization, it sounds quite different between those two, American versus British. And a lot of that has to do with the vowels.
Right, right.
And don't forget the R.
Oh, yeah, the R.
In American English, it's often very strong, that R, like car, park. But in British English, it's more subtle, almost like it blends into the vowel before it.
Right, right.
It's almost like it takes a back seat.
So like car park hair.
Exactly.
It's there, but it's not like this big.
Yeah, it's not shouting.
Yeah.
It's subtle, and that's what gives that accent its character. Remember that poem he mentioned, The Chaos?
Oh, yeah, the chaos.
He suggests checking that out because it's full of these sounds
Uh-huh.
that can trip people up.
Yeah, he said even native speakers.
Even native speakers can have trouble with it, but it's fun,
Yeah.
just to play around with it and explore.
I'm really loving all these practical tips. Like, he really seems to know what he's talking about.
Yeah, and what's cool is he emphasizes understanding like the mechanics of it all.
Yeah.
You know how your mouth and your tongue actually work to make these sounds?
Right.
Not just mimicking blindly, but really understanding it.
And he even recommends using visual aids like mirrors and videos to actually see what your mouth is doing.
Exactly. Compare yourself to a native speaker.
And he even recommends checking out YouTube tutorials,
Yeah.
for specific sounds.
Oh, yeah.
It really shows how useful online learning can be for something like pronunciation.
Absolutely. And speaking of online resources, let's go back to Forvo.
Oh, yes, Forvo.
I mean, it's like a pronunciation encyclopedia.
It really is. It's like having this whole world of pronunciation.
Right at your fingertips.
At your fingertips. Yeah, it's incredible.
A game changer for language learners, wouldn't you say?
For sure.
And Forvo, it's great because it's crowdsourced, so you're hearing real people pronounce words
Yeah.
in all sorts of accents, and you can compare, different regional pronunciations within British English.
It's making me think about all the different people I've met who have British accents,
Mhm.
and they don't all sound the same.
No, they don't, and that's why Forvo's so cool. It exposes you to that diversity
Right.
and helps you train your ear,
Yeah.
to recognize those subtle differences.
Right.
And remember how we talked a lot about the T sound?
Oh, man, the tape.
That's a big difference between American and British English.
Huge, yeah.
He uses the word butter
Right, butter.
to illustrate this stuff.
Yeah.
How in British English, it's often very crisp, that T.
Yeah.
But in some American accents, it can sound more like a D.
Almost like a D.
And he even mentions that in some parts of Britain, the T might disappear completely.
So it's just weird.
Pure, exactly. It's a great example of how even just one sound
Yeah.
can really signal,
Where you're from.
yeah, your identity.
Yeah. What about that R? That almost non-existent R in British English?
Right, like in car and park.
Yeah, when I first started paying attention to accents, that was one of the things that really threw me off.
It's definitely one of those signature sounds.
Yeah.
That makes you think British accent. He described it as almost more of a vowel extension
Oh, just
than a distinct R sound. Like the R is just kind of hinting at its presence.
right. It's not like
It's not the star of the show.
yeah. And he also brought up how the T can be so different between American and British English.
It's fascinating how these small differences can really make a big impact.
It is.
It makes you realize that, learning an accent, it's not just about mastering these individual sounds.
Right.
It's about understanding those subtle nuances and how they all fit together
Yeah.
to create the whole picture.
Absolutely. And speaking of word endings, remember the Asian ending that he mentioned?
Oh, yeah.
He pointed out that the vowels before this ending can sound different in American and British English.
Yeah, like the word organization. That A before the armadation sounds a bit different. It's one of those subtle things, but it's noticeable.
It really adds to that overall feel.
Right. It contributes to the whole accent.
Yeah. And now let's talk about word stress. Remember how we were talking about how word stress can actually change the meaning of a word?
Yeah.
Well, Forvo is really helpful for that too.
Of course, you can hear how different speakers put the emphasis on different syllables,
Yeah.
which is so important, not just for comprehension, but for sounding authentic.
It's like having that pronunciation safety net.
Exactly. Like, am I doing this right? Let me just double check.
And make sure I'm putting the emphasis in the right place.
Exactly.
Now, I know we've been talking a lot about like the technical details, but I think it's important to remember the bigger picture.
Yeah, right.
What's important is that he really emphasizes that while learning a British accent can be fun and rewarding,
Yeah.
it's not essential for communication. He really celebrates the beauty of all accents
Yes.
and encourages listeners to embrace their own unique voices. I thought that was really refreshing.
I agree. There's so much pressure to conform to these, standards.
Right.
But he's like, no, it's okay to have an accent.
It's okay. It's something to be celebrated.
And I think if we connect that to the bigger picture,
Yeah.
it's about recognizing that communication is about connecting with others and sharing ideas
Right.
and expressing yourself authentically.
Exactly. So what does this all mean for you? It means you can relax a bit.
Yeah.
It's okay to have an accent, but it's also okay to want to explore different accents.
Yeah.
And challenge yourself to learn new ways of speaking. It raises an important question, though.
What's that?
What's your motivation for learning a British accent?
Mm.
Is it purely for professional reasons?
Mm.
Or is there something deeper? A fascination with the sound, with the culture?
Yeah. It's a good question to think about.
Yeah. And remember, even if you do decide to go on this accent adventure,
Right.
it's a journey, not a destination. It's not going to happen overnight.
And he himself admits, that he's still refining his own pronunciation.
Right.
Even native speakers are on this continuous learning curve.
It's a lifelong journey.
Language is always evolving.
Hmm.
Accents are always evolving.
And that's what makes it exciting.
It is, it's this lifelong learning process.
Yeah.
Full of exploration and discovery.
I love that. And on that note, I think we should take a moment to gather our thoughts
Yeah.
and then come back to wrap up our deep dive into the world of British accents. Okay, so we're back and ready to kind of wrap things up. We've talked about so much when it comes to British accents.
Yeah, it's been a real deep dive, hasn't it? From like the nitty-gritty of how to make the sounds
Right.
to the bigger picture of, what accents even mean.
Exactly. And I think, one of the most important things that the podcast host emphasized was that, it's great to master a British accent. It can be a fun challenge, but it's not everything. He encourages listeners to embrace their own unique voices and really celebrate all the different accents out there.
It's true, and I think that's a really important takeaway for you listening. You're interested in this world of British accents.
Yeah.
But it's not about erasing your own voice.
Right.
It's about adding something new to your,
Repertoire. Yeah.
your linguistic toolbox.
And expanding your understanding of how language works.
Exactly, because appreciating, the richness of language, understanding that communication, it's about so much more than just sounding a certain way.
Yeah.
It's about connecting and sharing ideas and being yourself.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a few thoughts. First, remember that learning an accent is a journey. It's not like you're going to wake up tomorrow and sound like you're straight out of,
Right.
a BBC drama.
Exactly. And even he admitted, that he's still working on his pronunciation.
Yeah, he's a native speaker.
It reminds us that language, it's alive, it's constantly evolving and changing. Even native speakers are always learning.
It's a lifelong process.
And that's what makes it exciting, right? It's full of exploration and discovery.
Exactly. And who knows? Maybe along the way you'll discover a hidden talent for mimicking accents you hadn't even thought about before.
Now, here's a final thought. Why stop at just one British accent? Have you thought about exploring all the amazing regional accents within Britain itself?
That's a great point.
From the Scottish Highlands to the West Country, there's a whole world of sound out there waiting to be discovered.
It's true.
Each region has its own unique flavor and its own history woven into how people speak.
It's fascinating.
It really is, and it's a great way to really understand British culture and how language has evolved.
What a great point to end on. So as you continue your journey into the world of British accents, remember to have fun, embrace the challenge, and keep exploring. Thanks for joining us.